Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that, at first glance, might sound a little unusual. I mean, who would have thought that purple dye, a little splash of color, could have such a huge impact on the rise and fall of empires? Imagine walking through ancient streets and the only hint of purple you catch is from the cloak of a ruler, its vividness both dazzling and terrifying. Purple, you see, was the ultimate symbol of power and mystery, but it wasn't always that way. There was a time when purple was just, well, purple, a color, a pigment, something that might have seemed more curiosity than a crown jewel. But before we dive into the grand world of Roman emperors and Byzantine royals, we have to step back to when purple first began its extraordinary journey. This isn't just some random dye you can pick up at your local fabric store. No. It's one of the rarest and most precious commodities of the ancient world. It all began, oddly enough, with a snail. But not just any snail. This was the murex snail, a mollusk found in the Mediterranean. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how this little creature became the key to unlocking one of history's most enduring symbols. You probably won't survive this story without some patience. We're talking about a process so laborious and costly that only a select few could afford the luxury of wearing purple. Picture this: an ancient artisan crouching by the shore, gathering thousands of these snails to harvest their secret. You might have to wonder, why on earth go through all that trouble for some dye? Well, the answer is deceptively simple: color and the pursuit of status. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're in the mood, drop your location and the time of day where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear about your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the heart of the ancient Mediterranean, something remarkable was happening. The Phoenicians, those savvy seafarers, stumbled upon the process that would change the very meaning of color itself. They discovered that when they harvested the murex snails, extracted their bodily fluids, and exposed them to the sun, something magical occurred. A rich, deep purple dye was formed. But not just any purple. It was an intense, striking hue, one so brilliant it practically screamed luxury. And from there, a revolution was born. The Phoenicians weren't just your run-of-the-mill traders. They were the masters of this purple dye. In fact, their entire economy thrived on it. In the bustling ports of Tyre, one of their most prominent cities, purple dye became the cornerstone of trade. They exported vast quantities of it, creating a booming market that would carry this luxurious pigment across the Mediterranean world. You can only imagine how much money could be made from something so rare. And by the time the dye made its way into Rome, purple had already begun to transform from a humble color to the ultimate symbol of power. The Romans would come to understand that purple wasn't just a dye, it was a statement. Now, let's pause for a second, because here's the quirky tidbit. In those early days, just how much purple you could wear was a matter of life or death. Well, maybe not that dramatic, but it was certainly serious business. Roman law dictated that only emperors and high-ranking officials could wear purple. If a regular citizen dared to sport purple attire, well, they could find themselves in a heap of trouble. Historians still argue whether the consequences were severe. Some say the punishment was as light as a fine. Others suggest a more sinister fate, like exile. Either way, the message was clear. Purple was not for everyone. But let's take a closer look at the actual process. The technique behind producing purple dye wasn't for the faint of heart, or the faint of stomach, for that matter. Harvesting the dye was a meticulous, time-consuming affair. First, you had to collect the snails, thousands of them, and depending on where you were in the Mediterranean, the conditions could vary. Once gathered, the snails were crushed or squeezed to release a liquid. This liquid was then exposed to sunlight, undergoing a chemical transformation that turned it into a purple dye. It was an arduous process, so much so that it could take an entire village working together for days just to produce a single ounce of the precious pigment. Imagine that. Days of hard labor for just a tiny drop of dye. And considering how much purple fabric you would need to drape yourself in, you're looking at a real financial commitment. But what made this dye so special wasn't just the painstaking effort to produce it. It was the way it could be linked directly to power. Those who wore purple were announcing to the world that they had money, influence, and status, often as a direct consequence of their connection to the ruling class. So here we are, back in the sun-baked streets of ancient Phoenicia, a city's fortunes rising on the back of snails. Purple, at this stage, isn't just a color. It's a commodity, a secret, and it's just waiting to be taken up by a new, powerful empire. As you drift further into the ancient world, it becomes clear that purple wasn't just a color. It was a form of currency, a symbol, a way to say, I'm on top of the world. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves, because we need to follow purple's path into a rising empire, an empire that would make purple its very own trademark. Enter Rome. At first, the Roman Republic, with its blend of stoic military might and gritty practicality, wasn't exactly in the business of dressing up in lavish hues. But as the empire expanded and its political system shifted, something incredible happened. Rome, by now not just a city, but a sprawling, ever-growing power, needed to establish its identity. And what better way to do that than with color? For the Romans, purple quickly became the color. By the time the Roman Empire was in full swing, purple wasn't just a fancy extra, it was a statement. Wearing purple was an automatic sign that you were important, that you were connected, that you were untouchable, and no one understood this better than the emperors. Now, this is where the fun and slightly bizarre part comes in. Imagine you're a Roman emperor and you're staring out over your empire. How do you assert dominance? Well, wearing purple, of course. But it wasn't just any purple fabric that would do. It had to be the very finest. Only the highest-ranking Romans, senators, generals, and most importantly, the emperor, were permitted to wear the most potent version of the color, imperial purple, a deep, almost otherworldly shade that seemed to glow from within. This wasn't your typical dye job. No, imperial purple was so intense that it practically radiated wealth. Historians still argue over the exact reasons why purple became so intrinsically linked to imperial power. Some suggest that the rarity of the dye was the primary factor. After all, the vast resources needed to produce it made it a luxury that only the elite could afford. Others argue that the color's inherent association with the divine played a role. After all, emperors were often considered semi-divine. And what better way to emphasize this than to wear a color linked to gods and royalty? But let's not forget that in the world of Roman politics, symbolism was key. You were never just wearing clothes, you were wearing a message. Take, for example, the toga. A Roman emperor's toga wasn't just an outfit, it was a carefully curated statement of power. And the more purple you wore, the more power you signaled. Some emperors even wore togas entirely dyed in purple, an act that was a subtle, or not so subtle, declaration of imperial authority. It's like today's world of corporate branding, but with far fewer board meetings. And this didn't just stay within the emperor's inner circle. Soon, the aristocracy, senators, generals, wealthy landowners began to sport purple in various forms, albeit less conspicuously. Some wore purple trim on their garments. Others may have had purple accessories. In fact, Roman laws were created to ensure the exclusivity of purple garments. According to Roman law, the only person who could wear a purple garment without restrictions was the emperor himself. As we saw earlier, those who dared to wear purple outside the emperor's permission could face severe consequences, up to and including exile or worse. But again, Let's dig into the quirkier side of this. Purple wasn't just about wearing the color. Oh no, it had all sorts of political implications. Take the case of Emperor Caligula, for instance. This infamous ruler took his love for purple to the next level, reportedly draping entire rooms in purple fabric. It wasn't just a symbol of power, it was a kind of flex, a look at how rich and powerful I am gesture that would make today's Instagram influencers look like amateurs. Historians still argue over how far Caligula's obsession with purple went. Some say he wore a purple robe every day, while others believe he even tried to monopolize purple dye production for himself. Regardless, his purple fixation only added to his reputation as a ruler who took the idea of imperial grandeur a bit too far. But the role of purple didn't stop at the emperor's wardrobe. By the time the Roman Empire hit its stride, purple had spread to nearly every corner of the empire. It was on the walls of temples, draped across the altars of gods, and even used in the garments of high-ranking priests. The color purple became the physical manifestation of Roman supremacy, a tool to reinforce the empire's identity, its divine favor, and its imperial might. Of course, as with all things that become synonymous with power, purple's exclusivity eventually ran into problems. As more and more Romans began to wear purple, thanks to the growing wealth of the empire, the original association between purple and the emperor began to fade. This wasn't the first time in history that something once rare and revered had become a bit too mainstream. But before it lost its magic entirely, purple was firmly entrenched as the color of Roman royalty, and that's a reputation it would carry for centuries to come. Now, let's take a deep breath. This is just the beginning of purple's transformation into an imperial symbol. We've covered the Romans, but there's still so much more to go. Stick with me as we travel deeper into the world of Byzantine power, where purple would become even more than just a color. It would become a tool for asserting political dominance. We'll explore how the Eastern Roman Empire took purple to even more extravagant heights, and how it became a linchpin in the strategies of emperors who knew just how much power a simple color could wield. Now that we've seen how the mighty Roman Empire embraced purple as the symbol of its power, it's time to head eastward into the shimmering golden age of the Byzantine Empire, where purple would continue its royal journey, becoming an even more potent weapon in the arsenal of emperors. Picture this: the Roman Empire, long the ruler of the Mediterranean, suddenly splits into two, creating the Eastern Roman Empire, or as we know it, the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines, sitting at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, were in the business of holding on to power, both literally and symbolically, and, as you might expect, Purple played a massive part in their political theater. But the Byzantine twist? They took purple beyond simple royal fashion. It became an instrument of empire building. Now, by the time the Byzantines came into full force, purple was already associated with the height of luxury. But for the Eastern Roman Empire, purple wasn't just something you wore. It was something you used to reinforce the emperor's divine right to rule. In Byzantium, purple had become even more sacred. Emperors were seen as God's chosen rulers. So their association with the color purple didn't just reaffirm their power, it validated their divine mandate. And that's no small thing in a world where power often came down to the God's will. But how did this happen? How did purple evolve from an elite Roman color to a symbol of divine power in Byzantium? The answer lies in something incredibly clever the Byzantines did. They perfected the production of purple dye, effectively creating an exclusive, state-controlled monopoly that reinforced their image of divine authority. It wasn't just about producing purple for the elite. It was about controlling the means of production, making sure that only the emperor's court had access to the best, most prized version of the dye. Historians still debate how much of an actual monopoly the Byzantines had over purple dye production. Some argue that the state-controlled production was tight, while others suggest that private production still existed in the empire's borders. But one thing is certain: the Byzantine imperial family held the exclusive right to use purple dye in certain ceremonial garments, and they did everything they could to keep that privilege as tightly guarded as possible. But here's the cool part: the dye itself wasn't just precious because of its rarity. It was extraordinarily expensive to make. To produce the rich purple associated with the emperor, the Byzantines needed vast quantities of murex snails, thousands of them. Imagine the logistics. The murex snail had been a staple of Mediterranean trade for centuries, but the Byzantine Empire took it to an entirely new level, consolidating its hold over the snail's habitats, particularly along the shores of modern-day Turkey and Syria. And here's where we get to something that might seem a little strange. The process of creating purple dye was incredibly labor-intensive and costly. First, you'd need to gather the snails, thousands of them, mind you, and then extract their precious liquid. It took hundreds of snails to create even a tiny amount of dye. This made purple garments not just rare, but a symbol of pure decadence. Think about how many snails it would take just to color a robe, and then consider how much power it would take to wear that robe and maintain the monopoly. But the Byzantines were masters of political symbolism. They understood that purple wasn't just a color, it was a statement, a direct message of authority and divine favor. So, They didn't just make sure only emperors could wear it. They associated the color with all things imperial. The robes of the emperor were swathed in purple, of course, but purple also adorned the walls of imperial palaces, the drapes in the sacred halls of churches, and the tapestries that lined the processional paths during religious ceremonies. Every inch of purple in Byzantium told the people, this is the emperor's world. You are merely living in it. Historians still argue about the exact significance of purple in Byzantine life. Some claim it was the color of the divine, while others believe it was all about reinforcing social hierarchy. Either way, purple became a carefully constructed part of Byzantine political ideology. The emperor, swathed in purple from head to toe, wasn't just a ruler. He was a living manifestation of the divine right to rule, and no one else, not a single soul, could replicate that grandeur. But purple in Byzantium wasn't just about impressing the peasants with an emperor's godlike aura. It had a function in the politics of the empire as well. By the time we reach the peak of the Byzantine Empire in the 6th and 7th centuries, purple dye wasn't just a mark of royal fashion. It became a political tool. The very act of wearing purple had become a method of signaling who was in favor with the emperor and who was not. The emperor's inner circle, known as the Senate, and the highest court officials often wore robes trimmed in purple. The closer you were to the emperor, the more purple you were allowed to wear. But purple wasn't just for the elite. It was also a way to reinforce the social and political structure of the empire. Even the emperors themselves started using purple to signify their changing power dynamics. For example, some emperors would wear purple only on special occasions, keeping it reserved for grand ceremonies like their coronation or victory parades. Others, especially after the reign of Emperor Justinian I, would wear purple daily, especially when making formal imperial decisions. It was an outward expression of their will, a subtle reminder that they held not just political power, but divine favor as well. Now, let's pause here for a second. By this point, purple had morphed from a rare dye to a cornerstone of imperial power. It wasn't just an emblem of wealth. It was an essential tool in the Byzantine emperor's toolkit for asserting authority and divine right. But remember, nothing lasts forever. The empire, despite its wealth and power, would eventually fade, and purple, too, would begin to lose some of its shine. As we linger on the grand court of the Byzantine Empire, where purple reigned supreme, we can't forget that, like all things, purple's dominance didn't last forever. The empire that had once perfected the art of purple dye production and wrapped its emperors in the color of divine power eventually faced decline. And as the Byzantine Empire began to fracture and its political structure wobbled, the significance of purple started to shift. But before we dive into the decline, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer complexity and labor that went into making purple dye. When you picture the Byzantine Empire at its peak, it's easy to imagine lavish palaces, towering churches, and grand processions of royalty. But underneath the glittering surface of imperial power, there was a quiet, incredibly intricate process that made purple possible. And that process was founded on a mixture of craftsmanship, science, and, let's face it, a fair bit of grossness. The creation of purple dye was so much more than a quick trip to a local dye shop. It was a labor-intensive process, as we've mentioned before, but let's dig deeper. In the coastal towns where the murex snails were harvested, the production of purple dye involved an entire community working together. First, the snails had to be gathered, thousands of them, each one carefully plucked from the rocky shorelines. Then came the extraction process. The snails were boiled, and their fluids, a strange, milky secretion, were collected. When exposed to the sun, this fluid gradually turned into the richest purple pigment, but it was an incredibly volatile substance that needed careful handling. Here's where it gets interesting. To create a shade of purple that would stand out in the sunlight, it wasn't enough to just gather the snails. The snails themselves had to be very specific. The best dye came from a species of murex that was particularly rare. The more common snails produced a faint purple, which was considered inferior. But the Murex trunculus and Murex brandaris were the prime sources of the purple that would become synonymous with royalty. Each snail, despite being small, produced only a minuscule amount of the dye, so a large number had to be gathered to make just a small amount of fabric purple. This process was so time-consuming that the cost of the final product could leave you questioning whether it was really worth all the hassle. And yet, the results were staggering, a rich, radiant color that looked almost like it was glowing from within. As a result of this laborious process, purple fabrics were extremely expensive. While we've already covered how purple became the symbol of imperial might and divine right, let's emphasize just how exclusive it really was. A single royal robe made from purple-dyed fabric could cost the equivalent of a small fortune. The high cost of purple dye meant that it was used sparingly, only for the highest echelons of society. This made purple a color that practically screamed royalty, not just in the way it looked, but in its availability. Purple wasn't just a fashion statement, it was an act of political control. Historians still argue about how many murex snails were needed to create a full purple robe. Some estimates suggest that it took as many as 10,000 snails to create the required amount of dye for a single garment. And considering how much snails and labor cost, you can begin to see how purple's association with power, wealth, and exclusivity became so entrenched in the Byzantine mindset. However, as grand as the Byzantine Empire was at its height, it was not immune to decline. The complex political structure that had made purple such an integral part of imperial identity began to weaken. The empire faced economic difficulties, political instability, and military defeats that slowly chipped away at its foundation. And when an empire weakens, so does the symbolism of its icons. As the centuries rolled on, the lavish purple robes of Byzantine emperors became increasingly rare. The political structure was under threat from external forces: the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the internal revolts, and the weakening economy, and the exclusivity of purple began to lose its meaning. Even the production of purple dye started to fade. The vast resources needed to gather snails and produce dye became unsustainable. But it wasn't just the dye that began to fade. So did the color's connection to divine power. Yet, even as Byzantium began to crumble, purple still held its significance in more ways than one. It continued to be worn by emperors and nobles, though less frequently. It was a color that was passed down through the ages, a vestige of a once great empire. As the Eastern Roman Empire gave way to the rise of Islam and the Ottoman Empire, purple's influence didn't just disappear. Instead, it began to shift, becoming part of a broader world stage, its meaning growing more symbolic than ever before. But let's pause for a second here. We've covered a lot of ground, from the Phoenicians discovering purple dye to its rise in the Roman and Byzantine empires, all the way to its eventual decline. Yet purple still hasn't fully relinquished its grip on power. As Byzantium faltered, purple didn't simply fade into the background. It adapted, growing into something more symbolic than ever before. And with that, purple would go on to claim an entirely new legacy, one that would transcend the medieval world. But that's a story for later. Now that the Byzantines are beginning to fade into history's distant echoes, let's take a deep breath and consider what happened to purple after the fall of their mighty empire. You'd think that a color so closely tied to imperial authority might simply vanish into the past. But oh no, purple's journey is far from over. It had spent centuries as a marker of divine power and exclusivity. But now, with the Byzantine Empire in decline and the Ottomans on the rise, purple faced new challenges. At the dawn of the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire was on its last legs, slowly falling to the Ottoman forces. The once mighty city of Constantinople would eventually fall in 1453, signaling the end of an era. Purple, which had been the emblem of emperors and aristocracy, seemed like it might lose its significance. However, in a twist that would surprise you, the color didn't vanish. Instead, it began its transformation, finding new life in places where you might not expect, places where political power and wealth still clung to the old ways. So, where does purple go now, you ask? Well, it follows the thread of global power into the courts of new empires. The Ottomans, despite their conquest of Byzantium, didn't wipe out all the symbols of their predecessors. Instead, they saw purple's historical value and adapted it to their own use, continuing the tradition of associating the color with imperial grandeur. But purple also began to slip out of the hands of just monarchs and emperors. Over time, it became more widely accessible, especially as trade routes opened up and global exploration expanded. Historians still argue whether purple's continued association with royalty and nobility was a direct inheritance from the Byzantines, or whether it developed organically as other cultures came into contact with the color. But one thing is certain: purple, far from fading into obscurity, gradually became a part of Western European royal symbolism as well. Monarchs and aristocrats across Europe took to the color with enthusiasm, seeing it as the perfect way to maintain their status. Kings, queens, and their courts embraced purple as part of their regalia, reinforcing their power and wealth. The Ottomans didn't just maintain purple, they redefined it in their own image, weaving it into the fabric of their imperial court. For them, purple represented power and luxury, much as it had for the Byzantines and Romans. The sultans dressed in purple robes, and purple still adorned the lavish palaces and ceremonial spaces of the Ottoman Empire. But beyond just the clothing, purple also symbolized the empire's control over the remnants of the Mediterranean world, where Byzantium once ruled supreme. But wait, there's more to this story. As the Renaissance bloomed in Europe, purple experienced yet another renaissance of its own. During the 15th and 16th centuries, as Europe moved from medieval to early modern times, the color purple started to show up more frequently in art and literature. It wasn't just a color for kings anymore. It was a color for the elite. The old imperial associations with power and authority hadn't entirely faded. They simply shifted. Now, purple was being used to represent not only royal power, but also intellectual achievement, cultural prestige, and even the growing wealth of Europe's emerging merchant class. As European exploration expanded, so did the spread of purple dye. By the 16th century, European explorers brought back valuable commodities, including the rare murex snails that had been so coveted by the Phoenicians and Byzantines. This influx of materials made purple more accessible, although it never lost its sense of distinction. Purple was still the color of those who had climbed to the top of society, the nobles, the wealthy, and the powerful. But as history marches forward, purple's exclusivity continued to wane. With the Industrial Revolution came the first synthetic dyes, which drastically lowered the cost of producing purple fabric. One of the most significant breakthroughs was the discovery of synthetic purple dye in the mid-19th century by the British chemist William Perkin. It's almost as if purple, which had once been so rare and costly, had transformed into an emblem of everyone, or at least everyone with a bit of cash to spend. This moment in history marked the beginning of purple's democratization. The color that once signaled the highest echelons of society became more widely available to the masses. And here's where purple did something unexpected. It entered the realm of fashion. What had once been a color exclusively reserved for emperors and gods became a staple of haute couture. Purple's deep, rich shade became synonymous with luxury and high fashion. But now it was no longer exclusively royal. Purple was a symbol of creativity, artistic expression, and, of course, wealth. Let's pause here and reflect for a moment. It's astounding, really. Purple, the once mysterious, rare, and elite color, had become something entirely different. It had weathered centuries of change, from the Phoenicians to the Romans, from the Byzantines to the Ottomans. And then it had shifted again, this time from the ancient realms of empires and gods to the polished world of modern fashion and culture. Purple had survived, not just as a color, but as an idea, a symbol of power, beauty, and, yes, sometimes mystery. But what's truly fascinating is that even today, purple continues to hold a special place in our collective imagination. It's a color that invokes not just royalty and luxury, but creativity, ambition, and passion. Purple shows up on the flags of modern nations, in corporate logos, and as a symbol of individuality and uniqueness. In a way, the journey of purple tells us something about history itself. It shows us how power shifts, how the symbols of the elite can filter down to the masses, and how what was once a symbol of divine right can become a universal emblem of human creativity. Purple's legacy is alive and well. It's found on the runways of Paris, in the halls of power, and on the screens of pop culture. And all these centuries later, the color that once spoke only to emperors and kings still holds the power to captivate, to command attention, and to remind us of the past. As we continue our journey through the captivating history of purple, Let's focus on how this color, once the exclusive mark of emperors and aristocracy, transitioned into something entirely different, a cultural symbol that speaks to the very heart of the Byzantine Empire's identity and its lasting legacy. Purple, as you've seen, was more than just a pigment. It was an emblem of divine authority and an instrument of imperial control. The Byzantines, in particular, understood that purple could do far more than enhance a ruler's wardrobe. It was part of a broader strategy of maintaining their cultural and political dominance. By the time we reach the height of the Byzantine Empire, purple wasn't merely a color. It had become a statement of imperial power and authority. A Byzantine emperor, robed in rich purple garments, wasn't just a ruler. He was the living embodiment of God's will. Historians still debate whether the Byzantines saw their rulers as semi-divine or simply divinely appointed. But one thing is clear: purple played a central role in reinforcing this belief. For the emperor, purple wasn't just a way to look grand. It was a visual cue to everyone that they were the rightful ruler, ordained by heaven. And let's talk for a moment about how the Byzantines used purple in a more complex, strategic way. The color wasn't confined to just the emperor's robe or the grand ceremonies. Oh no, purple was used with a precision that might remind you of a modern political campaign. The Byzantine court often employed purple as a way of signaling political allegiances and rivalries. Members of the aristocracy, court officials, and even military leaders wore purple, though usually in smaller quantities, trim, borders, or lining, so they could subtly align themselves with the emperor's divine authority without overstepping. Remember that time we talked about the Roman emperors making purple an exclusive color? The Byzantines took that idea and refined it into an almost ritualistic use. It wasn't just a mark of privilege. It was a way to show where you stood in relation to the throne. You could wear purple to signal favor with the emperor, or wear just a bit of it as a sign of rebellion or discontent. Purple had become the ultimate political tool, one that whispered power and politics with every fold of fabric. But here's where things get really fascinating. Purple wasn't just about politics. It was embedded in the very fabric of Byzantine religious life. The Eastern Orthodox Church, which was a central pillar of the Byzantine Empire, also adopted purple as a symbol of its divine connection. Priests and bishops, when performing sacred ceremonies, would often wear purple vestments, further solidifying the idea that purple was connected to divine authority. The emperor and the church weren't two separate entities in the Byzantine world. They were intertwined, with purple acting as the symbolic thread that held them together. The emperor was not just the ruler of the land, but also the protector of the faith. and purple, in all its regal glory, tied this divine right to the physical world. Historians still argue whether the emperor's link to God was as strong in Byzantium as it was in the Roman Empire. Some suggest that the Byzantines, unlike the Romans, saw their emperor as more of a religious figure. Others argue that this idea was more about reinforcing the emperor's power through symbolism rather than an actual belief in his divinity. Either way, purple remained the ultimate badge of power, blending both political and religious authority in a way that few other empires could match. Let's now zoom in on the power of purple from a more day-to-day perspective. Purple was not only reserved for the emperor's personal garments. It was used in public ceremonies, parades, and religious festivals. When the emperor appeared in public, his entourage was often draped in purple as well, creating a powerful visual statement. It wasn't just the emperor's presence that was important. It was the presence of the color itself, a living reminder that the empire's power was both divine and invincible. Purple, in this sense, became a part of the visual vocabulary of power, and it was used by every layer of society to mark their place in the grand hierarchy. But let's not overlook the quirky side of purple in the Byzantine court. While the emperor and his closest allies wore the finest purple, the color also had a symbolic connection to something that could be considered unfashionable. The emperor's ability to control the color became a tool in political warfare. For example, purple was also the color of the emperor's enemies. In certain circumstances, rival claimants to the throne would use purple to make a bid for the crown. If someone could obtain purple robes or even dye their garments purple, they could potentially challenge the emperor's monopoly on the color, and thus their authority. This was not a random fashion choice. It was a direct challenge to the emperor's divine right. Historians still debate how frequently this occurred in Byzantine history, but we know it happened, and when it did, purple took on an almost rebellious edge. A color that had once been synonymous with divine authority now became a symbol of political intrigue, plots, and ambition. But despite the fleeting challenges to its dominance, purple remained a symbol of power, even in the face of rebellion. One of the most memorable moments in Byzantine history involves an emperor who fought to hold on to the power symbolized by purple. In the 6th century, Emperor Justinian I was determined to restore the grandeur of the Roman Empire and consolidate his authority over the empire. Under Justinian's rule, purple became even more embedded in the empire's identity. Not only did purple continue to symbolize the emperor's divine right, but Justinian also used the color as a way to consolidate his control over the empire's vast territories. He used the image of the purple-robed emperor as a form of propaganda, reminding everyone that he was the true heir of Rome and Byzantium, even as the empire faced external threats and internal strife. The Byzantine Empire was, at its heart, an empire of contradictions, a blend of religious fervor, political maneuvering, and military strategy. And in this complicated mix, purple was the one constant, the color that held it all together. Purple told a story of divine favor, imperial legitimacy, and political dominance, a story that would resonate through the ages, even long after the fall of Constantinople. Purple had transcended its roots as a rare commodity and had woven itself into the very fabric of power and politics, not just in Byzantium, but across the Mediterranean and beyond. From the shores of Phoenicia to the courts of Rome, and now into the Byzantine Empire, purple had become something more than a mere color. It was a symbol, an icon of control and divine will, wrapped up in the drapes of emperors and woven into the political schemes of power. As we move further into the winding story of purple, we're now standing at a crossroads in history. The Byzantine Empire, for all its glory and cultural richness, began to crumble. Its vast lands were being carved up by emerging powers, and the once great center of the Eastern Roman Empire, the glittering city of Constantinople, was now on the brink of collapse. The final fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453 marked a significant turning point. But despite the empire's decline, purple still had a powerful role to play. It wasn't just a color, it was a symbol of something far greater, an idea of imperial authority that would transcend the empire itself. When the Ottomans captured Constantinople, the last stronghold of the Byzantines, they inherited not just the wealth, the lands, and the grandeur of the city, but also its symbols of power, purple among them. The Ottomans were wise enough to recognize the significance of purple, just as their predecessors had. Purple, in the hands of their sultans, continued to represent imperial might. But now it took on a slightly different tone. The Ottomans had their own religious and political identity to assert, and purple played a central role in this. For the Ottoman sultans, purple didn't just represent their royal status, it also carried the weight of the conquest. Purple was a way of tying themselves to the legacy of the Byzantine emperors, but it also reinforced the idea that the Ottomans were the new rightful rulers of the Mediterranean world. Purple wasn't just a color of the past, it was a symbol of a new era, an era in which the Ottomans ruled, not only politically, but also spiritually, with the Sultan often being regarded as the protector of Islam. But even as purple continued to carry the weight of royal authority, it started to evolve once again. By the time we reached the 16th century, Purple had taken on an almost universal significance. It was no longer reserved exclusively for the emperor or sultan. It began to trickle down into the upper echelons of society. The rising merchant class in Europe and the growing wealth of newly wealthy elites saw purple as a marker of their newfound status. It was still a symbol of luxury, of course, but it was no longer as unattainable as it once was. The merchant class, especially in places like Venice, Florence, and Genoa, adopted purple as a symbol of their wealth and influence. They used purple not just in their clothing, but also in their homes, with lavish purple tapestries and drapes that symbolized their high rank in society. For the wealthy elite, purple had become a symbol of success, a way to show that they had climbed to the top of the social ladder. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about social class. Historians still argue about the exact moment when purple lost its exclusive hold on the nobility and entered the realm of the broader population. Some say it happened gradually, as new methods of dyeing and mass production made purple more accessible. Others suggest that it was the influence of the Renaissance that changed the game, as artists and thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael painted in grand palaces. Purple began to spread across Europe in more and more sophisticated forms. Renaissance art, with its grand use of symbolism, often incorporated purple as a way to signal wealth, intellect, and high status. The use of purple in art is a fascinating angle of this story. During the Renaissance, purple was often used in religious paintings to signify holiness and divinity. In works that depicted the Virgin Mary, purple robes were often used to symbolize her elevated status as the Queen of Heaven. But this was no longer just a color for royalty. It was a color that conveyed intellectual and spiritual power. As the Renaissance blossomed, purple was worn by artists and scholars as a symbol of their status in society. Purple, in this sense, began to move from the physical world of politics and wealth into the more abstract worlds of knowledge and art. Meanwhile, across the ocean, purple was quietly making its way into the New World. The Spanish and Portuguese, having conquered vast territories in the Americas, found a new supply of purple dye from a different source, the cochineal insect, which was native to the Americas. The Europeans soon discovered that cochineal could produce a rich, vibrant red and purple pigment, giving rise to a new era of dye production. While purple from the murex snail was still in use in some parts of the world, the new dye from the Americas created an entirely different market for purple. The arrival of this new source of purple pigment in Europe in the 16th century made purple even more widespread. In fact, the ease of production meant that purple was no longer something only the ultra-wealthy could afford. As more and more people across Europe were able to wear purple or decorate their homes with purple textiles, the color began to lose its aura of exclusivity. But it did not lose its cultural significance. Even as purple became more accessible, it was still understood as a symbol of prestige, though now associated with wealth rather than political or divine power. Historians still debate whether purple's association with royalty and divinity faded entirely during this period, or if it merely shifted in meaning. Was it the commercialization of purple that caused it to lose its mystical power? Or did the color's democratization make it more potent as a symbol of individual achievement and social mobility? Some scholars argue that purple's role in the royal courts of Europe remained strong, while others contend that it became less important as new sources of political and cultural power emerged. One thing is for sure, though. Purple had undergone a transformation that no one could have predicted. Once reserved for emperors and kings, it had moved through history as a color of political authority, religious holiness, and, eventually, social status. By the 19th century, as mass production techniques and synthetic dyes further revolutionized the production of purple, the color had become an everyday luxury for those who could afford it. It was now part of the fabric of modern life, no longer solely tied to the royal courts or the divine. But let's take a moment to pause and reflect. Despite its long history of fluctuating meanings and associations, purple continues to hold a special place in modern culture. It's used in everything from fashion to advertising, in politics and pop culture. Purple is now a global symbol, representing everything from creativity and spirituality to wealth and power. It has moved from the exclusive realm of emperors and aristocrats to a universal symbol of status and sophistication. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about purple's journey is how it has continued to adapt. From its humble beginnings in the Mediterranean, where it was extracted from tiny snails, to its eventual rise as a symbol of political and divine power, purple's transformation is a testament to its enduring appeal. It's a color that has transcended time and space, one that has been worn by kings and queens, artists and philosophers, and now everyone from fashion icons to everyday people. Now, with purple having conquered centuries of political upheaval and cultural transformations, we step into the modern world. The color that once symbolized divine right, imperial authority, and elite status is no longer confined to the halls of kings, emperors, or sultans. It's made its way into the fabric of everyday life, trickling down from royal courts to the streets and stores of modern cities. But as purple becomes more widely accessible, does it lose its mystique, or does it evolve into something entirely new? Let's first look at how purple's journey through history affects its place in the modern world. With the advent of synthetic dyes in the 19th century, purple became not only cheaper, but also more vibrant. No longer limited by the painstaking and costly extraction of dye from murex snails, purple was now mass-produced, and thus it found its way into the hands of the middle class. Once reserved for the elite, purple was now a color that signaled luxury, creativity, and even rebelliousness. In the early 20th century, purple's reputation as a color of power and prestige began to shift. No longer just for royalty or the ultra-wealthy, purple began to be embraced by a new breed of creatives, artists, and even revolutionaries. Purple became associated with individualism, artistic expression, and unconventional thinking. It was the color of the counterculture. Think of the 1960s, when purple became a key part of the psychedelic art movement. The vibrant, swirling purples in the art and fashion of the time weren't just aesthetically pleasing. They were symbols of freedom and nonconformity. Purple had, in a sense, come full circle, from the divine right of emperors to the rebellious spirit of the people. But purple didn't stop there. In the 20th century, it took on new associations with feminism, spirituality, and even politics. The suffragette movement in the early 1900s adopted purple as one of its main colors. It was a symbol of dignity, justice, and the struggle for equality. For women fighting for the right to vote, purple wasn't just a color, it was a badge of honor, a symbol of their power and determination in the face of patriarchal systems. It had gone from the color of emperors to the color of equality. Fast forward to today, and purple is still evolving. It's not just reserved for a particular class or group of people. It's everywhere. From the purple branding of global tech giants like Yahoo and T-Mobile to the purple carpet at the Grammys, purple is a versatile, omnipresent symbol. The color is associated with a wide range of meanings in the modern world. It can represent creativity, innovation, spirituality, and even nostalgia, depending on the context. A modern political leader might wear purple to signal their commitment to bipartisanship. It's a combination of red and blue, after all, while a fashion designer might use it to evoke luxury and sophistication. In pop culture, purple is no stranger either. Think of characters like Prince, whose iconic purple outfits became a symbol of their unique, boundary-pushing style. Or, more recently, the purple ribbons worn during awareness campaigns for causes such as Alzheimer's and pancreatic cancer, showing that purple's historical symbolism as a color of power and authority has been reimagined in the service of advocacy and social change. And it doesn't end there. Purple is deeply embedded in spiritual and mystical contexts. Today, it is still a color that resonates with the spiritual, the divine, and the artistic. In many cultures, purple is used in religious rituals to signify holiness or to mark moments of transcendence. It is often associated with the third eye chakra in some spiritual practices, a symbol of intuition and higher consciousness. For many, purple continues to hold an aura of mystery and reverence. But let's pause and consider a quirky tidbit. Purple has even become a symbol of royalty in less traditional ways. Take, for example, the world of modern politics. In the United States, purple is often used to represent a blend of the traditionally opposing political parties: red, Republican, and blue, Democrat. This subtle fusion of colors underscores the idea of unity, collaboration, and compromise. It's fascinating how, after all this time, purple can still shift and transform, adapting to the changing times while keeping some of its old associations intact. In fashion, purple has remained a color of sophistication, often used to denote wealth and luxury. High-end brands like Versace and Gucci have featured purple prominently in their collections, reminding us that purple is, at its core, a color of exclusivity. But now, it's no longer only for the monarchs and aristocrats. It's available to anyone who can appreciate its allure. It's not the exclusive domain of the rich and powerful, but rather a color for those who dare to stand out, express themselves, or tap into their inner creative energy. Historians still debate whether purple's significance will continue to evolve, especially in today's globalized world, where access to luxury and power symbols is more widespread than ever. Some scholars argue that the shift in purple's meaning over the centuries is a sign that symbols of power are no longer as rigidly defined as they once were. Purple, which once signified divine right and political authority, is now free to carry multiple meanings across cultures, generations, and social classes. Others argue that purple's association with power and prestige will remain as long as we continue to value wealth, creativity, and individuality. Purple, despite its transformation over the centuries, continues to hold a special place in the hearts and minds of people around the world. It's a color that has transcended its royal origins, yet still carries with it a sense of dignity and reverence. It remains a symbol of creativity, spirituality, and power, one that continues to inspire and captivate, whether it's on the catwalks of Paris, the streets of New York, or the halls of government. So, where does that leave us? Purple is no longer just a relic of the past, a color worn by emperors or used to signal divine authority. It's a symbol of the modern world, of politics, fashion, art, and culture. And as we look to the future, purple will continue to adapt, to shift, and to inspire. From the ancient shores of Phoenicia to the cutting-edge designs of today, purple's story is far from over. It's a color that will forever be linked to power, mystery, and beauty, and it's one that we'll keep seeing in all its various shades for centuries to come. As purple continues its journey through time, it's impossible to overlook how deeply this singular color has embedded itself into our modern cultural fabric. For something so rooted in ancient imperialism, purple now carries with it a surprisingly vast range of meanings. From the world of high fashion to the bustling corridors of modern politics, purple is no longer just a hue. It's a global symbol that speaks volumes across continents, cultures, and industries. Let's start with the realm of fashion. In recent decades, purple has enjoyed a notable renaissance. The deep, vibrant tones of purple have remained a fixture on the red carpets of award shows, such as the Oscars, where they evoke luxury, status, and refined taste. Purple has become the go-to color for those seeking to make a statement in the world of high fashion. Think of the purple gowns that dominate the covers of fashion magazines, or the purple suits worn by celebrities on the most prestigious stages in the world. Designers like Jean-Paul Gaultier, Alexander McQueen, and Valentino have made purple an iconic part of their collections, bringing it into the modern era while still respecting its royal roots. But it's not just the luxury fashion houses that embrace purple. It has trickled down into more accessible styles as well. In the fashion industry today, purple represents not only wealth, but also a sense of creativity and individuality. When someone wears purple today, they're not just making a fashionable choice. They're making a statement, often one that signals their unique personality or bold approach to life. Whether it's a purple scarf worn on the streets of New York City, or a bold purple suit worn at a corporate board meeting, purple has evolved from a color reserved for the elite to a symbol of individual empowerment and artistic expression. But purple's journey doesn't end there. In the political world, purple has taken on an even more layered meaning. For decades, the color has been used to symbolize bipartisanship and unity, particularly in countries like the United States. Politicians often wear purple as a subtle message of collaboration, especially in times of divided government. It represents the blending of red, Republican, and blue, Democrat, signaling that the wearer seeks to unite rather than divide. It's fascinating how purple, originally a color that marked political dominance, now serves as a bridge between ideological divides. More recently, purple has emerged as a symbol for social movements and awareness campaigns. From gender equality to mental health awareness, purple is now widely used in campaigns that aim to raise awareness about a host of important social issues. The purple ribbon has become a universally recognized symbol for various causes, from honoring domestic violence victims to recognizing those who have struggled with Alzheimer's disease. Purple has gone from representing the political and divine elite to becoming a tool for raising awareness and sparking social change. It's no longer a color only for royalty or the wealthy. It's now a color that speaks to the struggles and triumphs of everyday people. And here's where it gets really interesting. Purple has maintained its connection to spiritual and mystical traditions in the modern era. In many cultures, purple continues to symbolize higher consciousness and wisdom. Its deep, rich hue is still associated with the third eye chakra, often connected to intuition and the pursuit of enlightenment. In this sense, purple has moved beyond the physical world of politics and fashion into a realm of spirituality, where it represents personal growth, self-awareness, and the search for inner peace. Whether it's in the realm of yoga or New Age practices, purple holds a unique place as a color that transcends the material world and touches on the mystical. But despite all these modern reinventions, purple still carries with it a vestige of its regal past. Think of the modern monarchs and royal families who still incorporate purple into their ceremonial attire. From Queen Elizabeth II's purple robes at state events to the purple sashes worn by nobility across Europe, the color still retains its association with power, authority, and the divine right to rule. Even though purple has evolved and expanded beyond its royal roots, it remains tied to its imperial heritage, continuing to serve as a marker of power, influence, and prestige. However, purple's meaning is not static. As global societies continue to evolve and new generations embrace new ideologies, purple symbolism shifts with them. It now carries connotations of inclusivity, acceptance, and change. The color has become a way for modern individuals to express their support for causes, to align themselves with certain movements, or even to defy traditional norms. In this way, purple has transformed from an imperial symbol of exclusion into a color of cultural inclusivity, one that represents empowerment for the many, not just the few. And there's one last intriguing chapter to purple's story: its place in pop culture. As we mentioned earlier, the legendary musician Prince brought purple into the global spotlight in the 1980s, turning it into a symbol of artistic freedom, rebellion, and individuality. His iconic album, Purple Rain became a defining moment in music history, cementing purple's place as a color that breaks boundaries. Even today, purple continues to appear in the works of artists and performers who seek to create something different, something groundbreaking. Moreover, purple has also made its way into the world of sports and entertainment. Consider the purple jerseys worn by various sports teams around the world. The color is now frequently associated with teams that wish to convey a sense of dominance, elegance, and ambition. Whether it's the purple of the Los Angeles Lakers, a team that embodies the high stakes and the glitz of Hollywood, or the purple of other teams that have embraced it as their team color, purple has become a fixture in the visual language of sports, where victory and excellence are the ultimate goals. So, as purple continues its journey across time, its once sacred ties to royalty and divinity have evolved into something broader and more universal. It has transformed from the rare and precious commodity of emperors and kings into a color that represents personal freedom, social movements, and even spiritual growth. But at its core, purple remains tied to its royal roots, symbolizing power, influence, and creativity. Purple's remarkable ability to adapt to different eras, political climates, and cultural movements speaks to the enduring power of color as a form of communication. Whether it's worn by a ruler, a rebel, a celebrity, or an everyday person, purple continues to evoke feelings of awe, power, and possibility. Its journey is a testament to the way history's symbols can evolve, shift, and take on new meanings as they pass through the hands of different generations. Purple isn't just a color, it's a story that has spanned centuries, reshaping itself to match the changing world. As we come to the final chapter in the storied history of purple, it's only fitting that we reflect on how the color's journey has transcended empires, cultures, and centuries. From its humble, snail-extracted origins in the Mediterranean to its role as the symbol of emperors and divine power in ancient Rome and Byzantium, and finally to its modern incarnation as a global icon of creativity, luxury, and social change, purple has proven to be one of the most enduring and adaptable symbols in human history. What makes purple's legacy so fascinating is its ability to survive and thrive in the most unlikely of circumstances. Despite the decline of empires, the fall of kingdoms, and the rise of new social orders, purple has remained a powerful tool for communication. Whether it's used to signal political authority or artistic rebellion, the color continues to be a marker of power, individuality, and significance. And perhaps that's its greatest strength, its ability to evolve without losing its original allure. At the heart of purple's story lies the idea of rarity and exclusivity. Throughout history, purple has been linked to the very notion of power itself, whether through royal garments, religious vestments, or the political stage. Its rarity made it the ultimate sign of wealth and influence, and its deep, rich hue invoked a sense of majesty and divine authority. Yet, as time passed, the accessibility of purple shifted. No longer was it a color confined to the rich and powerful. It became a symbol of personal empowerment, a way for individuals to express their identity, their creativity, and their ideals. Think about how purple resonates today in every corner of the globe. It's not just reserved for the runways of Paris or the red carpets of Hollywood. It's found in the flags of nations, in the logos of corporations, and even in the streets of everyday life. Purple has become synonymous with originality and innovation. We see it in the world of tech, where companies like T-Mobile and Yahoo use purple to convey a sense of freshness and cutting-edge sophistication. In entertainment, purple remains a color of distinction. Consider the iconic purple carpet events and the recurring appearances of purple as a visual cue in music, film, and art. But even beyond its contemporary uses, purple's legacy is more than just a matter of fashion or branding. It's a reminder of the way color, like any symbol, can hold deep cultural and political meaning. Purple continues to be used in advocacy and awareness campaigns, where it represents causes like mental health, Alzheimer's awareness, and anti-domestic violence movements. The purple ribbon is now universally recognized, just as purple has been associated with social and political movements that seek to challenge the status quo and push for change. The color has come to symbolize a shift, a movement toward greater equality, a message of resilience, and a demand for attention to important social issues. It's fitting that purple, once used by emperors to keep their power unquestioned, now serves as a tool for the people, urging society to consider the overlooked and the marginalized. This dramatic transformation highlights the most powerful aspect of purple's journey: its ability to adapt, to be reinvented, and to become a vehicle for change. As we reflect on the ways purple has been used in everything from art to activism, fashion to politics, we can't help but marvel at its versatility. From the sacred robes of the Byzantine emperors to the rebellious hues of 1960s counterculture, purple has remained a color of significance, a color that demands attention and respects no boundaries. It's a color that says something profound about the world we live in. It tells us stories of power, history, creativity, and transformation, all wrapped in a rich, regal shade that continues to captivate our imaginations. There's something undeniably mystical about purple, something that ties it to the divine, to the otherworldly, to the things that are larger than life. It's a color that speaks to our deepest desires for beauty, power, and transcendence. And as we stand at the crossroads of history and modernity, purple continues to evolve, adapting to new meanings, contexts, and uses. But as purple's story draws to a close here, perhaps the most fitting conclusion is this: the legacy of purple is far from over. Even as we continue to march forward into the future, purple remains one of the most powerful tools we have for communicating identity, purpose, and vision. Whether it's a symbol of creative expression, social change, or personal empowerment, purple's timeless appeal endures. It remains a color that transcends borders, cultures, and eras, uniting us in its richness and depth. So, as we say goodbye to this tale of the peculiar rise of purple, take a moment to think about its enduring power. Look around you, whether it's in your clothes, your art, or the causes you support. Purple might still be there, quietly commanding attention, stirring emotions, and reminding us that even in a world that seems saturated with change, some things, like purple, remain eternal. It seems we've reached the end of the journey, where the grand tale of purple's rise and transformation concludes with a reflection on its remarkable legacy. But before we truly drift into the calm after this adventure, let's take a moment to relax the pace a little. After all, purple's long journey from the deep Mediterranean waters, where it first emerged, to its dominance in imperial courts, its adaptation in modern society, and its spiritual significance, has been one of resilience and reinvention. The richness of its color still carries an air of mystery, while its continued presence in our daily lives speaks to how deeply rooted certain symbols are within human history. But here's the thing: even as purple remains a symbol of power and creativity, it also invites us to think about how the stories of history continue to influence our lives today. When you look at the color now, on billboards, in your clothes, in pop culture, think about the weight it carries, not just as a pigment, but as a constant thread through time. In a world that changes at such a rapid pace, there's something comforting in knowing that certain symbols, like purple, endure and adapt in ways we might never expect. As you settle into the warmth of this knowledge, let your thoughts float freely. The history of purple may have been a long one, but it's never really over. It's a reminder that no matter how much time passes or how much society shifts, the colors and symbols we cherish are part of something larger, something that ties us to the ancient past, even as we move into the future. So, take a deep breath, let the calm of the night take over, and know that the journey of purple will continue, not only in history, but in your own life too. And with that, we ease into the final moments of this story, fading softly into the stillness of night, where the mysteries of purple and all it represents quietly linger in the background. Good night and sweet dreams.